and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is now required to add the letter X to his name in all business correspondence.
Tim Longo.
Tim Longo.
X.
Yes, there you go. Well done.
That's
referencing a little E3 news there for those who are current. The latest Xbox is the Xbox One X, or the Xbone X, as I've heard it.
Xbone X. Mm-hmm. That's pretty good. Yeah. They changed all of our email addresses to,
of course,
Tim Longo X at Microsoft.com. Yeah,
that's good. I had two things this week to use for the intro, and they were both only worked for this episode in a rare embarrassment of riches. The other one was a man who gets his kicks on episode 66.
Nice.
Obviously, I can't use that next week. So.
Right? No, you can't.
No, you're supposed to say nice when we do episode 69. Come on. Okay.
Old and new references. Very clever.
I'm just all over the place today. Sometimes this stuff just comes to me, and what am I going to do? Anyway, we are talking about Half-Life. Actually, I should... I will. We talked about this in pre-show. I will come clean. I did not finish the homework this week. Normally, I'm way ahead of Mr. Longo.
You're a little busy.
I'm a little busy. And the other bit of news is that Tacoma, which is the game I'm currently working on, was in the Microsoft keynote or presser or whatever, and they announced the ship date, which is August 2nd.
Oh, it's done now.
That's basically tomorrow. Yeah. So we're in a position where we're certifying soon. Quick aside for those who don't know, certification is a process that games go through on consoles. It was basically invented by Nintendo for their seal of quality. And they defended it in court, and it's the reason why we still have consoles today. Because what killed Atari back in the 80s, we're totally into deep history now, but what killed Atari in the 80s was that the market was filled with crap. I mean, just shovelware was dumped because somebody reverse engineered the carts, and they just dumped, you could buy $2 games in bargain bins everywhere some of them didn't even run. I mean, it was just a mess. And so when Nintendo basically reinvigorated the market 5 years later with the NES, they made people who put games on the platform have to apply and basically have to license the platform, the ability to be on the platform, and created this Nintendo seal of quality, and were sued over it because people wanted to also dump shovelware onto the NES, but they won in court. So... they were able to prevent that from happening, and there was no second console apocalypse. So a little bit of history for everybody.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah, that's why there are certification things that happen, and it's that painful part of the process where you work all kinds of hours to get in all the platform requirements, things like achievements and user sign-in, just all the stuff that you have to do for consoles. So that is my life right now, and that is why I'm behind on my homework.
And that is an appropriate reason, in my opinion. So it'll probably
I didn't clear it with you in advance, so I'm glad that I...
Well, yeah, it'll probably bite me.
I didn't have to get a note from my doctor or anything like that.
Yeah. Yes.
Anyway,
shipping is rough.
I did play a couple... Yeah, it is pretty rough. The end part of projects is bad, always, but we won't go into that too bad. Let's pick up where we left off last time, which was basically we had gotten almost to the end of where the demo went, the original demo for Half-Life. And this next part actually was so, where it ended anyway, was so compelling because it was dramatic and surprising, and it really left people on a cliffhanger of like, oh my god, what's next in this game? Do you want to kind of describe what happens next?
Well, I don't actually remember where the demo ended specifically.
It's basically the first room where you see this new enemy.
Oh, okay. So you're saying so once you get so the first couple levels, the names are escaping me. I don't have them in front of me. You're working your way.
It ends and we've got hostiles.
Yeah, you're basically working your way up to the surface right after the catastrophe happens, and you finally essentially get to the surface. You see the open air, blue sky, kind of the mesa, kind of landscape. And then you're introduced to the Marines you're talking about, right? The Spec Ops kind of style, the quote-unquote military that you will come upon throughout the rest of the game, and they are hostile to you, and trying to kind of seemingly shut down the whole operation and kind of do a clean sweep so nobody, I assume...
Kind of a black op or something, like, okay, this was not supposed to happen, shut it all down. Shut it down.
Yeah, clean it up.
Shut down all the power, the trash compactors on level 15.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of trash compactors, but you didn't play that far, so...
No, I didn't get that.
No spoilers, but yeah, a little classic trash compactor in your future. Yeah, and I think you're going to speak to this in a moment, but the sort of mind-blowing element of kind of coming back to our first episode where we were talking about just how fully realized the world was, and they kind of have these realistic feeling Spec Ops kind of military forces repelling from helicopters and kind of coming into the space really was an additional, like you had this whole science theme going on, but then you bring in the military and they're hostile to you, so you're sort of like, what the heck's going on? And then to have them act the way that they did at the end of the demo, in a time when, there was a lot of great shooters out there, as we talked about last episode, but they were generally, monster based. There weren't too many kind of seemingly highly intelligent humans, and this one was really kind of rang true with people, and kind of just especially having it in the demo, our minds were just blown as we recall. So do you want to talk about the AI some?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll talk to it kind of in general terms, but it also just left that impression of like, oh my god, if it gets this good, like what else is in this game? Like you got to that point of just like, it kept ramping up, in terms of like drama and quality of, the sort of storytelling and also the restraint that we talked about a lot last time, in how it goes about setting this world up. And, it basically ends bringing you up to the surface. I think you could get as far as basically the door to go back inside. I think that's as far as you could get in the demo. But I think if they shot you at all, like if any of the Marines killed you, I think it would end then. I think that was the other dramatic thing, was like you could push past it if you didn't get shot at all. But I think you could basically get up to the surface where the helicopters were and get to that door, and then it would stop right there if you got that far. Mm-hmm. So that's what I recall. I didn't double check that. But yeah, I mean the soldiers were they lived by a couple of rules that Nathan Martz codified for us. He was one of our AI programmers on Republic Commando. And what Nathan said about AI was, in order for an AI in a video game to look smart, they need to live a fairly long time, and they need to, while they're alive, not do anything obviously dumb. Right? So, running in the walls or, avoiding, just like running straight at you is kind of dumb. These soldiers use cover. They move around a bit. They retreat. They call out what they're doing. And this was one of the first games in which that happened, where they would say...
It was key.
They would say, if they lost you, they would say, recon, like, go look for them. They will say, they say, we've got hostiles, which, of course, is the chapter title. They'll say, over here, when they do see you. So there's a number of things that they're doing, that beyond and above and beyond the sort of easy rules of, live a while and don't do anything obviously dumb. They have these good focused barks, which really convey what they're doing and really what your impression is of what they're doing. Because, as we know, video game development is all smoke and mirrors. I mean, AI is just, it's all about making you think that they're smart and not them being smart. They also animate into military postures before they shoot, so they go into a stance, either a one knee or sort of a side, side facing to you, one leg back, one leg forward to kind of, to aim at you. They're very precise in their aiming, which is actually not hard. That's actually a lot easier than making enemies who miss you realistically. Yeah. But because they're reinforcing that with it takes time to get into this posture, it gives you time to react, and also it makes them look smart and makes their precision believable. So that's kind of nice. That's a different way to approach that problem. Like, in Starfighter, which was not too long after this game, we took a different tack, which was we made enemies fire in front of you deliberately, so you would see the bullets, or the lasers, I guess in that case, and have them track back towards you. So you would know somebody's firing on me, and it would start, progressively moving towards you, and then you'd start taking damage. So you had time to react and shake and stuff like this. Here it does the opposite, where it's like it gives you time before it shoots you exactly, but it doesn't do any shooting in that time. So you can see the character animate into a position where it's like, it's gotten into that crouch, I'm dead. So that's a cool thing.
Yeah, the telegraphing was quite good. Yeah,
and it makes total sense. One of the problems that the game has is that telegraphing the other creatures don't make as much sense because they're alien. We have no history with any of these other creatures.
Yeah, you have to learn them.
Right, you have to learn their telegraphs, and it's not obvious. But when you get to these military guys, like you see them go into these stances, you go, oh no, he's got a bead on me or whatever. Go ahead.
I was just going to add that the other interesting that I had forgotten that they use so much is the other interesting sort of. I'd love to hear your side of how easy or hard this really was at the time, but their use of grenades to flush you out is pretty consistent, and it really makes them feel even smarter, because when you retreat or when you try to hide, they have the audio barks for using their grenades as well, but they're pretty reliable at getting the grenade near you, and so it flushes you out, and it just gives, instead of just, in sort of a Doom or a Quake way, just rushing toward you, which they do a little bit of that sometimes, but they'll quickly retreat if you get some damage on them and you don't kill them. But instead of just rushing right at you, they'll try to flush you out,
Yeah, that's a good point. It's something I noticed too, is that it's sort of like so what I've noticed is that when you get into a position where you may have a tactical advantage. So I noticed this especially in a room where there were catwalks above, which is where you enter into the area, and they're below you. So you, in theory, you have the higher ground, and therefore you have an advantage, right? And that's when I really noticed them starting to use those grenades tactically like that, is that I'd come up to the railing, I'd look down, I'd try to fire off a couple shots, but really I was just getting a sense of position, and then I'd move back and think to regroup. And that was when they toss a grenade up there.
Yeah,
which is really good. I mean, that's not difficult to do. I mean, you're doing line of sight calculations probably frequently, with these characters, and when you've lost line of sight, and you probably have your last line of sight. So what you basically do is spawn a projectile, and calculating the arc for that is not a big thing. I mean, in Republic Commando, we did that with characters, right? The what are they called? Geonosians?
Yeah, Geonosians. Yeah.
The bugs that they jump from spot to spot and they fly through the level. I mean, it's basically the same physics as grenades. Although you don't have to animate a grenade. You just spawn it and you toss it and it arcs and it goes in the right place. That's not that hard. The interesting thing is taking data that you already have, like, because we know, from what I said before, that they're keeping track of I can see you or not, and they change into a state where they say things like recon or flush them out or whatever, and they sort of change that state to like a seeking behavior. But if they know where you were and they can throw a grenade there, they'll do it. And that's great. And they'll yell grenade and they'll, toss a grenade or fire in the hole, I suppose, is probably something else they say. I stopped writing down the things they said because I was, tense and playing. But yeah, it's a thing that not a lot of people were doing up until this point to reinforce, what the AI was actually doing. They took things that might normally be seen as like computational and kind of alienating and turned it into something that was really a strength of like, we're going to communicate what we're doing in a way that feels like what a military team would do. Crack Black Ops team or something like that.
Yeah, it's all perception based. I think just the retreating alone is a big one for me. Just as far as like, ups the perception of their intelligence, quite a bit, because it just
that lets them live longer, right? I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that they live longer. It's not obviously dumb to retreat. In theory, they should be way overpowered compared to you, because they've got bulletproof vests, and you're wearing this, I don't know, fancy hazardous suit. But yeah, it works, and it was probably the most compelling moment in the demo for me. I remember getting to this point and going, oh my God, they've sent in the military, and oh my God, the military are deadly. It was just really
yeah, they take you down pretty quickly too. Yeah, so they definitely make them lethal. I'm just surprised playing through that section again, and later on too in sections that you haven't gotten to yet. Like there's a lot of hallway combat with more Marines. Or more military, and I haven't seen them do anything dumb, very, very infrequently. For this day and age, for that to be so consistent and at least from a perception standpoint, pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think the rest of the AI in the game, the human AI, like the Barneys and the scientists, are actually pretty similar. In sort of their capabilities, it's just that they don't, they're not attacking and things like that. But they have a very limited space in which they'll actually work. Like, so you pick up a Barney, he'll follow you so far, and then he'll say, I'm not going any further than here. The scientists are even shorter range. They sort of, like, I'll go up to this point, and then it's like, oh, now there's something that might be threatening nearby. And they have nothing to do as characters at that point. The Barneys can push a little bit further because they have guns. They can shoot the head crabs and things like that. So I feel like all the humanoid AI actually is fairly similar in that regard. Like it has short spaces where it works, and they don't try to push it beyond where they know it will work. So you don't have some enemy, military guy who's just following you through the levels relentlessly. It's just
yeah.
They have this space. They work in this space, and you kill them all. Now you don't have a problem with them, and you move on, right? It's just, and so you have those limited spaces where they're going to work really well, and they can show off things like the grenade showing, the grenade throwing rather, and places to retreat to, lots of boxes to hide behind. Just all these sorts of things that they can do fairly easily, and then they just let it go. If you race ahead, which is what I ended up doing. Once you get up to the open air, you can actually just race through that, and there are other guys around, and if you can get to that door quickly enough, they won't follow.
Yeah.
Right, and so instead of trying to push it to the point of, okay, that guy's going to do something else, he's going to go and open the door, and he's going to come down the ladder or whatever at you, they just punt. And they assume that the player is in a state where he's looking forward rather than looking back. And just let the spaces where it's going to work. So I think that, it's just, it is really, the soldiers in particular, the Marines, really stand out in that regard, above other games of the era. And I think made the demo especially remarkable. They also have these crazy barks that actually are very similar to the, is it called the Combine in Half-Life 2?
Yeah.
Right. So it's very similar to what the Combine does as enemies, again, in Half-Life 2. Sort of short barks, clearly, indicating what they're up to. and really good placement, and really good choices about where they are. So yeah, I think that all just really adds up really well. The one other thing that I noticed that I thought was really strong, and it's not really about the AI in particular, but they are subject to the same rules that you are. So there's interactions between you and the enemies. Like the particular thing I noticed was the I don't know what they are, but the things that stick on the ceilings and drop their long tongue /
Yeah, I forget
whatever.
the names. I had the list of all the enemies up, but I don't have it up right now.
Yeah, so whatever those things are called, in that introductory warehouse area where you're first kind of seeing the soldiers at the same time, there's one of those on above a staircase, and if you can stay alive long enough, maybe take out one or two guys, they will run into that.
Yeah.
And it'll pick them up, and it'll drag them up, and they'll be screaming, and they'll get eaten, and it'll spit out a bunch of, skeleton, and giblet parts. And it's the same thing that would happen to you, and that's compelling.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that gives you sort of a psychological mirroring of, these guys are just like me. They're in this unfamiliar situation and dealing with the same things I'm dealing with, and they don't know as much as I do yet because they just showed up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just
I wrote the same note down.
Yeah, really good usage of these things, these different elements to make enemies that seem really, really smart from really a very small number of pieces, and that's really the key to good AI is make things that aren't hard to program. Use information that you already are going to have. You already know you're not going to shoot if you can't see the guy. Oh, okay. Well, I just keep track of where he was last. I mean, just these are simple things that you're already probably doing, and turning that into a really rich experience for an enemy is just fantastic. And actually, I mean, I thought that we were going to kind of go into level design next, but I think it makes sense to talk about enemy design more broadly at this point, just because we're kind of already talking about the enemies.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely wanted to hit this some. I think that most of the other enemies are obviously overly simple, and I actually, in this early sort of first half of the game that we've played so far, they generally are seen by themselves, and I believe later in the game they start mixing them up, which is where it gets much more interesting. But when it comes to really good, I mean, Doom was doing some of this beforehand in Quake, of course, but when it comes to really good orthogonal enemy design in shooters like these, there's a lot of good examples here with these guys, and I forgot to bring up the list of names, so I'm not going to call them by their actual names, but to give some examples, if you talk about the one-eyed sort of bipedal guys that warp in and then they shoot the green lightning bolts at you.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
There's a good telegraphing for them with their charging up. They're distance based, right? They're not melee based. Then you have a contrasting with the little dog.
The dogs with the sort of sonar attack.
Yeah, the sonic attack. They actually have to run in closer to you, and then they do their sonic attack. So their tel is actually closing in distance on you. And when they get into a certain range, then they do an area effect versus a precision-based, right? So you just having some really clear and simple decisions being very different from the two of those. Those are just two examples of being very different kinds of enemies that change what you are going to do in a drastic way from reacting to each of them. And then you can imagine later when they start mixing those together how interesting it will get when you're trying to kind of deal with both of those situations. And then, of course, the head crabs. Then you have the head crab zombies, which are pretty standard zombie stuff and not too interesting. Right. They just do a lot of damage if they get too close to you. And then head crabs are just kind of a fun little nuisance.
Yeah, I mean the thing about the head crabs is, of course, they're recalling Alien. Mm-hmm. They're basically trying to jump up and latch on and turn you into these zombies. So the zombies themselves aren't interesting, but you put them together with the sort of the dread of like, oh, that's what I turn into if one lands on me.
Yeah,
is nice. Even though they're not terribly threatening, it's a couple pistol shots to kill one.
No, but they're small, right? Like they're small. They're low to the ground. They jump at you at kind of like usually at the same interval, but a little bit unpredictably. So you're not exactly sure sometimes how close you can get before they jump at you, and they kind of throw themselves at you. So they're kind of like dumb in that way, and kind of adds to sort of their character. But I think one key for the head crabs, and I think why they've become such a iconic enemy in video games overall, I'd say, even though they're ripping off Aliens, I think one improvement that they have over the Alien facehuggers is the audio. And I think the thing with the head crabs is you'll be moving through the game and you'll hear their little chittering that they do, right? They'll be in a duct above you or around a corner or something, but you don't really know. So there's always this...
Right, because they're small. Yeah,
they're small. Yeah. They could be in any corner. We talked a little bit about this with the monkeys in System Shock 2, right? Where the monkeys don't move... Yeah, and they don't move around that fast. And before they've seen you, the monkeys at least, before they've seen you, they have these little, where they're just walking around. And so you're kind of trying to track where they might be. You don't want to alert them. And the head crabs are similar, right? They just pepper them through a level.
Right, exactly.
And it just keeps you on edge enough to where you're kind of looking over your shoulder and stuff.
What I was going to say is there's different wind-ups for these things. They all have a good sort of wind-up in a sense, in that you have some time, before they actually do their attack. With the dogs, they run up, they stop, they kind of cant their head to the left, and they lift a leg, and they starting to scream or whatever. Yeah. But they're close. You have the long wind-up with the the laser, the lightning throwers, whatever those are. Where they appear and then they start and the lightning starts shooting off in directions like they're drawing static electricity in or whatever, and and then they fire at you, so you have time to react to that. And the head crabs are like, and I mean, I think that someday we're going to play Doom on this podcast, and orthogonal enemy design is all over that game. So we'll get to that someday, but. And you may not think back on that way, but I think playing it again, you probably would. But anyway, the head crabs are sort of like the Imp's fireballs. They don't do a ton of damage. You see them coming, but they're small, and there's not a lot you can do about them once they're on their way. So, the interesting, they fill a sort of similar role as those projectiles did. They're kind of a fairly slow-moving thing, but you can't really dodge them. You really have to dodge them before they jump. It's like, oh, here they go. Oh, they're going to jump. Okay, I move, and...
The head crabs?
Yeah, the head crabs. Yeah. And the same thing with the Imp's fireballs. It's more like, well, they're coming. I have some time to move. They're a little bit slower, so you maybe have more time. But that's because these things jump only when they're closer. So, I don't know. I think there's some interesting... parallels there, but they're definitely doing something different from Doom, and they're making that alienness really pay off. These things behave in different ways than we've seen in first-person shooters before this point.
Yeah,
and I think that's a huge part of how they work.
Yeah, and I definitely don't want to downplay the importance of Doom's enemy design, as you said, and I think Quake even dabbles with some of that too, because they kind of brought in the Cthulhu mythos to some degree in the Quake stuff, because
because they have to, because Cthulhu is it's all things you can't possibly kill.
Right, exactly. Well, it's everywhere at that point. But no, it was who was the Chaosium guy? He actually worked on Quake with them. Anyway, a little bit of a side thing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Sandy... I'm going to forget his name.
Oh, Sandy Peterson.
Yeah, Sandy Peterson worked on Quake. He was a writer, maybe?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So they hired... So anyway, that's where I think that influence came from. But anyway, yeah, I think that, speaking kind of from close to home for me, some of the really really well done orthogonal alien design and enemies. Obviously it was a bread and butter for Halo as well. Mm-hmm. And I think the genesis of that really, yes, Doom was starting to do that before this and some others, but I think the fully realized versions for this era really come from this game. And I'm looking at they call the Barnacle is the one from the ceiling. The Hound Eye is the one that runs up close to you. The Sound Dog, and then the one I forgot was the Bull Squid, which is the
thing that spits
at you. And I think the key call out there is that generally, though it has a melee attack if you get too close, where it kind of like crunches you, but long range projectile based enemy is also an interesting combination, because the lightning, the alien slaves, they call them in this one that I found on IGN, but they have another name that starts with a V. Their lightning attack is a little more instant, and the bull squids are projectile based. So you have the interesting kind of interplay where when you're fighting a bull squid and they're pretty far away, you can actually dodge their projectile based, poison.
Right, but the alien slaves you have to deal with before they fire.
Yeah, right. So just
you have their opportunity to hide behind stuff, in between, and
And the audio is really important for them, for the alien slaves, and so and then there's more.
And audio is generally important, like
for everybody.
Yeah. I mean the like you said, the head crabs telegraph really well. The the zombies really don't so much. I don't think. Like it's not so. I mean they make noise, but it's not always clear. You don't feel it's as threatening because they're not going to grab you. There's one point in Blast Pit where they actually placed them in a place where if you dropped into where they were, there was one on either side, and you're kind of in a bad spot. There's a little ladder you can go down, and there's two of them at the bottom, one on either side. And so there is kind of help of the audio cue of, like, they're here somewhere, and you might think they're behind this door that you can't go through at that point. So,
they basically, they're idle before they're alerted. They have a sound that, if you're paying attention,
you're just kind of moaning, right?
Yeah, you can kind of like, oh, there must be one nearby. Where are they going to be? But they're all, I would say, the enemy placement, which is also sort of a fine art in and of itself. The enemy placement is all very good in this game too, and so the I guess I'd say the pacing and the kind of the surprise moments, or the times when, using the zombies as an example, where there's a zombie in a corner that's maybe behind you as you're turning, it's behind you to the right as you come into a place where the flow of the level is to the left. So you kind of come in and you hear them and you're like, oh, I wonder where they are. And the light kind of guides you naturally to the left, but they're kind of like to your right, like in the dark. And so there's that moment. Then they're not, like, it's not usually an unfair thing where they just backstab you. They just kind of wake up with enough time for you to turn really quickly and see them. Like, I've had a few of those moments that seem really well placed.
Well, and that's perfect for a zombie type.
Yeah, that's what you
enemy,
want.
Right? That's what you want. You want this payoff of, like, I outsmarted the zombie, right? Or really to extend it a little bit further, I outsmarted the level designer. He placed that there to mess with me, And I've had moments like that where I open a door and there's one right there, and then I like react quickly enough to back up and shoot it with the shotgun or whatever, and there's a moment of like, ha-ha! I know you. Nice try.
Exactly.
Nice try, level designer.
Vortigaunt is the alien slaves, and the reason I wanted to find that name is that they're when you find out more about them in Half-Life 2, their race is actually a pretty interesting kind of backstory.
That's the sort of thing I entirely forget. But I do remember that being the name.
Well, anyway. They call them alien slaves because they don't really want to be there.
Right. Oh, that's right. Yeah, no, I do remember that a little bit from Half-Life 2. That's true. That is true. I do remember that. Well, I would not have remembered that, though, had you not said that. That's not the sort of thing I remember from games. There are a number of things I didn't remember from this game that I'm...
jeez. Wait till later. What are some...
the thing that I immediately was thinking of was I didn't remember hopping on this train and kind of racing it and getting thrown over this big pit of toxic waste that I then had to jump around in and platform to get out of. That was kind of a pain in the neck. But then the other thing that really was like all the stuff with the fans that are going to cut you in half.
Yeah.
There's like a fan that you have to like turn on. This is in the blast pit. Turn it on, but you have to like turn around and book it up a ladder, or else you're going to get cut in half.
There's a timing.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, before we get to level design, which I'd like to also touch on a little bit, that is so far the one thing I've been a little disappointed in on a revisit, which is just like the times when I get to a point and I have to die to figure out what, how to get past this next thing. It's that thing that, and it's usually environmental stuff and not enemies. Enemies, by and large, feel very fair and well used, but the places where it's like, oh, I get onto this little bit of elevator. This happens all through the blast pit. I get onto this bit of elevator. I hit the button. It starts going down, and then it breaks and it starts plummeting. And I have to jump out of it, but I need to have known there was a ladder that I'm going to jump to, or I need to have not even started that thing moving down to do it. Like, there's a lot of like learning by death. The fan is another one, where it's like I go down and I do the thing. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. I hit the button. How am I to know that I can't get back up past that? Because earlier there's a fan whirring in a place that you can't go through, but the ladder's in a corner. And you can go down the ladder safely.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of not clearly telegraphing what the rules are for how they're going to kill you. Mm-hmm. And it feels at those times unfair. And then the third time, and this is the worst. And this is the blast pit where you basically turn on I guess it's the power. Yeah, because the fuel and the oxygen is one part, and then the power is another part. And you go into this area, and there's this thing that's just like kind of on this path where it goes back and forth, or in this circle. And if it hits you, it kills you. It's an instant death.
Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you climb up, and there's a switch to turn, and it took me a while to figure out. Oh yeah, there's a switch on the other side. Turn that on, and these rods come out. Well, the rods will kill you. And you go down the ladder, and of course now that thing's going to kill you again because you forgot it was there. I don't know how many times that thing spinning around that circle has killed me. I mean, it's well over a dozen now, and I know it's there. Like,
I
don't know how far I can go down the ladder safely. Mm-hmm. It's hard to know where it is. Of course, now you've got this electricity that's arcing across over the top of you, so you want to move kind of quickly. I mean, these are all areas where I feel the game does not well support its environmental challenges, and plus there's jumping. There's in the blast pit area. There's also jumping where it's like I have to jump this gap. Well, turns out it's a lot better to jump this gap, kind of running on a diagonal. That feels a little bit unfair. I mean, there's just lots of little like, like I had to make this jump 5 times. Why? Like I mean, there's no value in that. Like the. I messed it once. Oh, great. Second time. Oh, 3 times. Oh, my God. Come on. And then who knows where the autosave was. I mean, stuff like that has been hanging me up more, Mm-hmm. Part of that is, of course, I was trying to race through and play it quickly, to get ready for the cast.
That hits us hard.
I'm working crazy hours, every day. But, that hits us hard every game we do because we're doing them.
Well, and I think those experiences and those, both navigational puzzles as well as just sort of simple logic puzzles, those became more of a bread and butter thing at that era, and I think we were a lot more forgiving at that point because it was kind of fun to figure that stuff out. But these days, like, that stuff just doesn't fly anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't fly.
I think this happens to us on a podcast where we get frustrated by essentially usability challenges that shouldn't be there, but it's a 15-year-old, 20-year-old game or whatever.
No, they still happen. I've been,
Oh, they definitely do. No, don't get me wrong.
On other games. I mean, I played some Far Cry Primal recently, which is a game that I really like, and I'm looking forward to the next Far Cry and all that stuff. Those are games with huge checklists. I mean, there's things that I just like.
Oh, you must pure,
perfect. Warm bath for me. Like, here's a million things for me to do. I'll just check off these lists. But but there are areas where it's like, oh, if you jump down into this area, you won't know which direction you have to run quickly, and you'll die. And it's like, oh well, gotta and so those things are still there.
No, they definitely are. I think that I was just making the point that I think we forgave them.
Yeah, back then we were definitely and the other thing, this game was giving us so much that was new and awesome.
Yeah,
that we were willing to forgive the experiments that weren't working. Just having these Marines that were so awesome made us forgive so much. We would have given them just so much leeway after that. Like, figuring out in the blast pit, they tell you, they're like, these guys are attracted to sound. Well, what does that mean?
Their stealth system, quote-unquote stealth system, is not good, so it's really trial and error, and kind of, I died a lot getting back up through that once I had everything on, because it's just like, it's unpredictable what they're going to do.
And you can't jump through that window.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So there's lots of things where it's like, well, I should be able to jump through that window. It's bigger than a vent.
Is it an open window?
To get to the room where you actually turn the rocket on. Oh, it's huge. It's that big wide window.
No, I know the window you're talking about, but is there like bulletproof glass on it?
No, because it broke through and grabbed the scientist.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. That's
so there's not even any glass. Like, you should be able to just jump through there.
Yeah.
But instead, you got to go and go past where the Barney was and all that stuff. And there's things like that where it's like they dramatically want a thing to happen, and so they kind of force those systems. Well, and we forgive it, but
Well, and I think one thing that I do want to call out specifically, kind of, especially having played 2 sessions at this point, I do they definitely force the order of events that they want occasionally, but I do think that when it comes to pacing in a shooter, they really do a good job at this game. That was another kind of unsung, I think, revelation for this game when it came out, in that the pacing of, if you think about sort of the competitors and the other shooters in the space at the time, it was very action-centric primarily and combat-centric, and very focused on kind of that breakneck pace of a shooter, and that was its bread and butter, and I think that's what they were great at, and I think that Dark Forces to some degree did a little bit better at that, but generally, default was still combat. And here I feel like they really tried hard to have a good ebb and flow to the kinds of things you're doing and the pacing, and then both on the micro and on the macro, because as you'll get farther, some of these levels in their entirety, the concept for the levels, like Blast Pit is probably one of the most memorable levels I've ever played in my first, especially first-person shooter life. It's just, it's the tentacle level, right? And then there's some unforgiving, kind of unfair aspects to it, but this core concept that the whole level revolves around these tentacles, and that you're kind of like weaving and going back and around, and the scale of a lot of the rooms was really cool. Mm-hmm. Felt real, like we quoted Gabe in the first episode, a really fully realized place. And it just was a kind of a theme that everything revolved around, which not a lot of games were focused on doing that kind of stuff very much, right? Where they would pick, and there's the next 2 levels after this that you'll play next, I want to talk about when you finish them too, because they both do the same thing. They pick a theme and they stick to it very strongly, and I think it creates this interesting kind of macro pacing to the whole thing, where you're kind of like you're always. I think that's the thing that this game did, is you're always surprised about what they're going to come up with next, because they had a concept they saw it through to its fullest extent for the time. So anyway,
it's funny because I think that that's actually a hallmark of the series, because it feels that way with Half-Life 2 as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be what really separates Valve's shooters from others, entirely. I think as much as they don't support some of the mechanics as well as other games do, this is a common complaint I had at the time, is like, well, Deus Ex lets you do stealth gameplay, but it's not like Thief where it directly supports it. Here you've got the same sorts of problems where it's like, well, it sort of supports these types of gameplay, but doesn't fully support them, like the jumping. All of these things are just not well supported. Because they don't communicate well what they're actually doing. But one thing that they do very well is key in on a mechanic or an idea, and kind of flesh that idea out in a really interesting way. And that is unique. It may not be unique to Valve, but it's certainly memorable of Valve. I can't immediately think like, oh, and here's this other shooter company that does things like this, that are this solid this way.
Yeah, they just made it their goal, and maybe that's a reason why we haven't seen Half-Life 3 or anything since.
It's like they haven't figured out that next thing.
Yeah, they make it their goal.
Or that next series of things.
They want things to stand out and be unique and interesting and unexpected, I guess. And I think if there's one thing the shooter genre as a whole has suffered from is that, and we both were in this space. I'm in this space now, and am as much to blame as anybody. It's like, where is that innovation coming from, right? And how different are things, and how much are shooters retreading territory, because it's the safe way to go, and it's really challenging to find new stuff, in the while you're running a AAA team. So,
yeah, that's something we've certainly talked about in the past. I think in response to a reader question at one point it's really hard. With a big team relying on you to set direction or what have you, to try something risky and scary, those things usually take a while to try, and to be able to take them to a full conclusion. I've, working at Bethesda, which is, it's often first person, but it's not really first person game, in the sense that we're talking about. But their approach is more throw a ton of stuff at the wall, see what sticks, throw out or just kind of leave unfinished a bunch of stuff, and then make some of it better. That's it's a totally
some
different.
Parts.
It's a different sort of approach. To take like some of those ideas and make them really super polished would be really difficult. Those games would take at least twice as long.
Yeah.
And that's why there's kind of they're just different approaches, but it's the same sort of burden. Like how long can we spend, and literally when I say spend, I mean spend, to work on these things, to figure out what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think you make a good point about sort of some of the mechanics that are not fully realized as they should be. I do think it's a fair criticism of the game that, and it is, I would count Half-Life as, at least in the traditional first-person shooter space, as much more of a sum of parts kind of shooter versus, like, an example I would give is that I don't think the shooting experience, quote unquote, is that great in this game.
No. We've talked about the movement too.
Compared to
little too momentum, based.
As far as like from trigger to hit, that whole experience, as we would call it, like that is a multi-step, designing and executing. And artistically and audio and everything affects everything that goes into when you pull that trigger, and then when the enemy is hit, and kind of all of that exchange there is really hard and complicated to make really good,
Yes.
And there's a lot of different facets to it that people, I think, take for granted.
Have no idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really.
It was a thing that we didn't know
when it doesn't work.
We had no idea about it on Republic Commando.
No, we messed it up. We
messed it up terribly, and like 6 weeks before E3, the year we were going to come out, we were like, oh my God, we're making a shooter and nothing feels good, from trigger to, really is what we were at.
Yeah.
I won't say nothing, but it was like...
Well, it was basic, right?
We had to have a Tiger team at that point to like throw Nathan, but also a level designer and an animator and, audio. Like, just like, here we're going to take these 6 or 7 people and they're going to figure out how to make all these things feel really good. There were at least 2 programmers, because I think Jenny Huang was on that too. Huang. I can't remember if she was Huang or Huang. But anyway, Jenny.
Yeah.
And it's just pushing that stuff. And it was like we didn't know. and that stuff's really hard.
And this was their first shooter as well, so I think you can see where some of the basic versions of this stuff is coming in, but
right.
you just couldn't beat id in this era for their shooting experience, just the precision of it, and just it was really gratifying to blow up demons, and such. And
they were like 10 engines in already.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
and while Half-Life has the benefit of some of that experience, at least from an engine perspective, what they lack is the design experience that kind of built up along with it. So,
yeah.
But some of that, as we talked about with the sort of enemy design, they really did execute well on. So yeah, it is kind of a mixed bag that way, but the sum of the parts is still pretty good. Like, you look back and man, a lot of different really good parts.
Yeah, and memorable. I think I use this example a lot with I guess with the team and just anecdotally talking about it with friends and stuff about stuff. But I really enjoyed the StarCraft 2 games, all three of them that have come out, because I think one thing that they did better than even their previous RTSs, and this is a roundabout point, but is that every level they essentially, for the most part, every single level they introduce a new mechanic of some kind into it. And RTSs are pretty rote, right? Like, you can get bored of them from a campaign perspective pretty quickly if there's not something interesting and fresh and new keeping you going. And they just basically...
I'm so bored of them, I haven't played since Warcraft 2?
Yeah, exactly.
No, StarCraft 1, I guess.
Well, and that's kind of my point, is I think they're thinking to themselves, for the campaign, we can't just have these, these base attacks every level. We need something fresh. And to their credit, they committed to it, and pretty much every level in all three of those games has something about it. There's some shtick, right? There's a lava is rising halfway through, the level and kind of going up and down, and so you have to react and move your units around because the lava's coming. And I'm just using that as an example here, where you have Blast Pit, which is, again, one of the most iconic levels for me in any shooter of all time. And okay, that's the tentacle level where you had to go and had to sneak around them and go up and down through the levels and then turn all this stuff on. And then the next one with I think it's called Power Up, that we'll talk about, that is all about this big boss creature you can't destroy, so you have to go do all this stuff. And then there's the railway that's coming up, and that's all about the railway, So there's these core concepts that are unique to that level that you might use a little bit in other levels before or after, but they commit fully to this one thing. And I think it just makes them more memorable that way and more interesting. And it keeps that pacing going, right, and that flow for the player, where they're like, oh, what am I going to see next? Yeah.
Well, I think what we're going to see next is a quick break.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
We'll be back in a second.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. I'm Brett Duvall here with Tim Longo X, and we were going to hit a couple pieces of feedback and then call it a night, because we've both got a lot to do. Tim, I sent you an email with some questions in it, I believe.
Okay, the one from Jordan?
The one from Jordan.
Okay, email from Jordan Staley. Hey guys, been listening to your podcast since you tackled Final Fantasy IX. That Kotaku article about it drew me in, and I absolutely love it. Even when you play games that aren't really in my wheelhouse, you somehow manage to make it entertaining and thought-provoking. You've hooked me. What can I say? I was curious, how much exposure do you have to Japanese games? You talked about it a bit in your series on Ueda games, Super Metroid, and the Final Fantasy IX episodes, Eastern versus Western RPGs. But I found the little tidbits of conversation so fascinating that I'd love for you to have a chance to go into that topic in more detail. Guess I'll have to wait for you to play more Japanese games. I'd also love it if you could talk more about musical design in gaming. I feel like it's often underappreciated. Playing Nier Automata through and experiencing its brilliant soundtrack, Have a Taste, he sent us a YouTube link, made me realize that it's not really a topic that comes up in your show, beyond you two saying that you enjoyed the music in a particular level and so on. Maybe see if you can get an interview with a composer sometime. Just a thought. It's not really in theme of the podcast since the focus is on development, but I thought it might be interesting. Or it might be a train wreck. You guys make the call. It's your show. Jordan S. P.S. I kind of hate to say this because it makes me feel like a shill, but if you guys ever get around to playing Nier Automata in your free time, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I feel like it tells the kind of story that only a game can tell. It's definitely one of the most creative games I've ever played. The trailers don't do it justice. And getting the true ending was one of the most fulfilling gaming experiences I've ever had. If you guys get a chance, I highly recommend giving it a try. It's got its flaws, but I think it's something special. Yes, I have heard that about that game on many other podcasts and from other friends, and it is an interesting game to play. I mean, maybe... I mean, it could be a bonus episode for us in some way because...
It's one I'm going to play. I mean, I replied to Jordan an email and said, look, I am going to play this game, but in, like, August. For me, I've been so busy the last 6 months that I just, no way. I have not had time to play games other than what we play on the cast. So.
Well, I feel like at some point we're going to hit that legacy because it's Platinum, right, which was Clover, which goes back to Capcom, or was that...
No, they split off from Capcom, I believe.
So it's like, and that goes back to Devil May Cry?
Yes.
And so I'm trying to track it back, right, and just keep going back, and like that third-person action fighter, whatever, you call that specific combo-based, combat, which is not in my wheelhouse, I'd say, but the good ones I do enjoy.
And like we could tie that in with the JRPG and go and play what's it called? Vandal Story, something like that.
Oof, deep cut on that.
Yeah, it's like Final Fantasy 1. Oh man, I can't even remember the name.
So it's not PlayStation 1.
Right? Yeah, Vandal Hearts. Vandal Hearts?
No. I think it's...
No, it's not
Vandal Story. I thought that's... Anyway.
Oh my god, I can't believe I'm...
To his questions. I think Brett probably has a better... To the first question, I think, Brett, you probably play more Japanese games than I do overall. You play more games than I do in general overall. So it is a blind spot for me, I'd say, other than sort of the key Nintendo and loving Ueda's games and Metroid. Or, I'm sorry...
Vagrant Story.
Okay, there you go.
That was killing
I remember when you were playing that back in the day.
I've played it twice.
But Metal Gear is also... I'm a huge fan and can overtake Brett on that topic. But it is something that we need to focus much more on, I think, and make sure that we're... Well, I don't know. We've done maybe... A third of the games have been maybe Japanese games because we played Resident Evil.
We played Resident Evil. We played
Super Metroid, Ueda's.
We played Ueda. Yeah, you're probably right. It's probably at least a third.
I think it is a blind spot for me, though. I fully admit. And for me, I think it's slightly cultural, in that I just don't. It doesn't resonate with me as much as I think it does other people. Other than for whatever weird reason, Metal Gear that I just love.
The interesting thing, and you mentioned Resident Evil is a case, and Metal Gear as well, are both.
And I played all the Resident Evils as well, like those two series.
They feel like lenses on Western film translated into games.
Yeah, that's true. They're definitely inspired by that.
And they are. They're super weird for that because it's a Japanese view of a particular thing, and of course their culture is very different. But yeah,
it's fascinating to me. Like I really want to. Like, there's a side of me that really wants to delve into it more deeply. I just haven't. So it's been fun for me to play some of that stuff. I've played all of the games we've played here, other than Final Fantasy. I've played before, but it's good. It's fun. It's been fun to kind of talk about the cultural side of things on the podcast.
Yeah. We may have even have played half as Japanese games because as far as influences, You know, I mean,
yeah.
we've hit the big ones, you know, as far as that goes. Between Final Fantasy,
it's hard to dispute their influence.
The only one we really haven't is Metal Gear.
Metal Gear, Castlevania.
Yeah, but we hit Metroid.
Yeah, that's true.
I think Castlevania is itself interesting just because it is, again, sort of a Western thing with it has more of that combo stuff that you were talking about. Maybe some interesting stuff. When you get a little bit later and you're doing like Devil May Cry and stuff like that, then you really dive into that stuff, you know, or Ninja Gaiden, for example. I mean, I've probably played more Japanese games than Tim has, but I mostly, you know, for the most part, it's been like a ton of Final Fantasies that he hasn't played, or it's been, Dark Cloud, you know, the JRPGs kind of, which all have sort of a similar feel. But yeah, I mean, we will definitely hit more Japanese games. I just need to pick the ones to make Tim play.
Yeah, we should pick. Well, and you've probably played Metal Gear, but we will do Metal Gear at some point, and probably we'll start with Metal Gear Solid. So we'll skip the 16-bit and 8-bit stuff, but.
Right.
But there'll be a lot to talk about there. And I guess as a segue to your second topic, I do agree with you, Jordan, that it is... we haven't been talking about music and music design and composition as much as we should, because it actually is... I'm not a musician, but I'm very passionate about it in my day job and consider it to be one of the most critical and most important parts of any game. And so... when it's done well, it does stand out to me, and I do feel like we've been doing it a disservice and not talking more about sort of deep examples of it. I definitely know we can get some composers on here. I actually work with the audio director and composer from Kojima Productions. They both work on Halo, and so they didn't work on Metal Gear Solid 1. Tajin may have as the audio director or audio designer, but so we'll find a way to get somebody on.
There is a ton to do there. I mean, it's one of the things that we probably could have talked about a little bit more in Day of the Tentacle, but if we someday play like Full Throttle, it's even more apparent, I think, there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot. So this is like the iMuse stuff that LucasArts did. Yeah, there's a ton of stuff. I mean, the thing about the music is... if it sounds good, like, you don't notice it.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things about Half-Life is, you know, and I noticed this when I produced the show last week, is that the music's not great.
Yeah, it's pretty standard. Yeah.
You know, it's like knockoff kind of Quake music, maybe. You know, I mean, it just doesn't
90s kind of like
exactly. I mean,
rocky.
Like Quake had the Nine Inch Nails soundtrack. You know, that was written by the Nine Inch Nails guy, whatever his name is. Sorry, I'm
it's escaping me. This is terrible.
But that guy, he wrote the soundtrack for Quake, but it's like pulse pounding, blah, 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 you know, go, you know, and you tend not to notice it. And then, but yeah, I mean, and
Trent Reznor,
exactly. But you tie it, like in the Japanese games in particular. I feel like it does a really good job of underscoring the emotional feelings you're supposed to be having, especially in JRPGs. Like, I think the music is amazing in those games.
Yeah.
And then, technically speaking, I mentioned iMuse. I feel like there's a lot of really good musical stuff in games that manage to stitch together multiple samples and kind of like pull in, you know, what we called stingers for Republic Commando, which is like little bits of little riffs, but timing them at the right time so they fit in. With the rhythm. There's a whole huge problem with music where it's like, I want it to be interactive.
Yeah.
But I want to, you know, musically accentuate something the player has just done at some random time, you know. And that's just, all of it is a really interesting problem, and probably something at some point we need to, like, set aside just an episode where we really dive deep on, here's a game that really executed well on this.
Yeah.
Not just had really good music, but executed well on all the elements that go into making music really integrate well with a game. And so that's something we really need to look and find an opportunity to do.
We'd have to pick one specifically to go after, because I think
to know. Yeah.
In a weird way, I'm trying to think. I feel like this is probably an incorrect statement, but I feel like as some of the more dynamic elements of innovation in games, I feel like dynamic music was something that was coming on later than other things. And it really shouldn't have been the case, but, for the most part, like even in Half-Life or what have you, like a lot of music was triggered via linear, triggers, and was playing, or it was just playing as an underscore for the whole level or something like that, right? You didn't really get a lot of super dynamic stuff happening.
But Tim, we were like 5, 6, 7 years into LucasArts adventures at this point. I mean, when was Loom?
Yeah, but I don't know if I would. I mean, memory's poor, but I'm talking about like dynamic music that's really the composition of the music is underscoring what the player is choosing to do.
That is what happened in iMuse.
Is it? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I'm just misremembering then, because those games are puzzle solving linear games.
You don't feel like that's what's going on, but it is going on. You know, and that's what makes it so difficult to talk about, really, in a sense. I mean, I would say we had an opportunity to talk probably more deeply about it in Shadow of the Colossus, which I think does all of this really, really well.
We talked about some. We did talk about it a little bit.
We did talk about how good it was, but we didn't talk about how it's like when you've done the thing, here I am, I'm turning into Tim talking about Zelda. You've done the thing, and it cues up the victory music or the now you're in this really kind of epic moment music, and like you finally climbed on top of the thing.
The boss battles definitely are pretty dynamic, based on succeeding and failing and all that stuff,
So it's a huge topic and something we'll definitely return to. So thank you, Jordan. I have the other email that also has a couple of questions for us. He says, this is from Corey Potomas. He says, hi, Brett and Tim. Really enjoying the podcast. Started listening after hearing Brett on Kotaku Split Screen. I've been a mid-core gamer most of my life, but have really dove back in deep this past year. As a 30-year-old dad, it's nice to hear a gaming podcast by older adults. No offense, I swear. Yeah, who are you calling? Never mind.
Us.
Us. I had a few quick questions if you guys have a second. One, I've heard Brett mention streaming a few times on the pod. Is this on Twitch? I found a Brett Duval on Twitch, but I wasn't sure if it's the real deal. If you look for me, I'm going to answer this one just out of band. If you look for me on Twitter, I think I use the same icon, which is Reed Richards, because he's got gray hair at the temples. That is me, old guy. If it's got that picture, that is me on Twitch. 2, gaming industry question. I've worked for about 8 years in operational management and strategic planning in the biotech industry. My day job involves project management, communications, leading meetings, getting people on the same page, etc. I have no computer programming or artistic skill. Neither do I. Either one. Are there roles in gaming companies similar to what I've described? I understand it's a tough industry, but wondering if there's a hypothetical role for me. And then finally, 3, catching up on the Super Metroid episodes while staying up to date with Half-Life. Just a quick recommendation for Ori and the Blind Forest as an excellent Metroidvania title. Sorry for the long email. Really enjoying the show. Keep it up. Ori. So really the big question here is there a role for me? And I would say, that sounds like a producer. Does that sound like a producer to you?
Yeah. It's a producer, product manager. Yeah, those definitely similar goal. Similar roles with the same goals on every team. I think the challenge for breaking in from another industry as a producer, though, is personally, I think that there is that sort of hard step to take where you probably need to get in onto a team and into the industry via sort of a smaller game or a smaller company that's willing to take a risk on somebody outside of the industry, because even though the skill sets, all the ones that he mentioned, running meetings and kind of keeping people on the same page and, schedules and budgets and things like that are all very similar to probably what he's doing now, there is one big advantage that I think I value personally in good producers that in the games industry is that they know how to make a game. You know what I mean? They've gone through the process, and yes, there are the logistical aspects of being a producer that are common between any producer of any kind of industry that has that sort of similar skill sets, but there's a lot of kind of experience that comes with what we do too. And I think it's like coming straight in to say work on Halo or something would be a pretty big challenge, because we're really going to look for somebody who has shipped games and has kind of been in the trenches. But it's definitely possible for you to to kind of find an indie project, or maybe smaller mid-tier.
That's exactly
team.
where I was going to go. It's like, if you could find a way to do a little freelancing to do production as a, 10 or 20% project for yourself.
Yeah.
And help somebody out part-time, maybe for low or next to no pay for indie projects. I mean, they need that work, they just can't afford it. Often, they just don't have the budget to do it. But to be able to help somebody out who's making a project that hasn't yet found a publisher, or whatever, hasn't figured out what its financing is going to be, and help guide them into those things, and at the same time help them be focusing on what to do to make their game. Those are the sorts of things that build up your cred. I mean, often producers come from QA, because at that point they may get to a point where they're managing other people in QA and sort of determining where to spend effort and things like that, just like you do with anything that you're managing as far as a project goes. And then they make the switch into development, and now they're doing the same sorts of thing, but on the development side.
We come from film and from from all sorts of other places. Microsoft's also interesting because there's a lot of PMs within Microsoft that migrate over from any number of places, everywhere from Office to server, Azure server stuff, over to work on Halo because they wanted to try out game stuff. So some of that stuff transfers over for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, if you can get to a company that has, certainly Microsoft has some, I don't know about biotech, but medical type stuff. I guess that's technically biotech. But, there are ways. You just maybe need to find the company that, if you want to kind of do it at a higher level, you need to find the company that has, feet in both of these worlds. But if you want to find a different path in, it might be easier to find those small projects that really could benefit from the use of a producer, but who just don't have the bandwidth, or the finances to buy that role.
Yeah.
Normally that's something. Yeah. Normally that's something that the lead person on the project is doing just as part of their job.
Right.
Like you go to Campo Santo, and basically Jake and Sean are doing that.
Yeah.
But they're also writing and doing design, and this, and at a certain point they get to be solid enough that and have enough funding that they can hire somebody to specifically do these sorts of things. But the skill set that you described sounds like that's a producer. Just finding your way in is probably the hard road, and hopefully that helps. So yeah, thanks for the email, Corey. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and shout it out because I don't know, 4 or 5 days after this comes out, it's Father's Day, and we've had a lot of email from dads who say I don't have as much time as I used to for gaming because I'm a dad now. But yeah, Father's Day is this coming weekend, and happy Father's Day to you, Tim.
And likewise, sir.
Tim X. And happy Father's Day to our fathers listening. Let's do a couple of quick pieces of review. Some reviews from iTunes. You've got one from Polly Pop.
Okay.
Sounds like a dad.
Yeah, let's hope that, but that's what that means. So yeah, great show, no filler, 5 stars. Geez, by Polly Pop with a 0. interestingly enough. Brett and Tim have worked on games ranging from big to small and truly know their stuff. Despite clearly being industry insiders, they are still approachable and regular old gamers. Don't let their calm, cool, collected approach to the podcast fool you, because the show they put together every week is filled with knowledge and passion, and it's worth a listen. If you're tired of overproduced bullet point hipster casts and want some down-to-earth gaming talk and insight, then please listen. Yeah,
Yes.
we're definitely not
We are not
casts.
hipsters. Oh my god.
That's great.
I mean, unless like being a hipster is like having really big hips, because I think I feel. I don't know.
Well done.
That's
that
the
was
thing
definitely
about-
not a hipster joke.
That was
a
not
dad joke.
Yeah. Oh my god. Father's Day is coming up. Thanks. Yeah, we are not hipsters. We've been around too long for that. But yeah, I mean, we are trying to hit the big, these big games that really kind of underlie everything. But thank you for the email, or rather the review, Polypop. And I'm going to take one from Kirk Peterman, one word, Kirk Peterman with a U, in Kirk, not in Peterman. That would make sense. Anyway, he says, fantastic deep dive into gaming classics. Dev Game Club is an illuminating discussion into some of the games that helped define genres. Having grown up playing many of the featured games as a kid, I couldn't be happier to listen to Brett and Tim bring decades of gaming history to a new generation. The critical insights they share come from their veteran status in the industry, giving the audience a refreshing take on gaming with a keen eye for design. Hopefully keen for eyes, but I mean, that's why I had Tim on. To try to get to that. But yeah, I mean, that's
a patch. Nobody knows that, but you actually have one eye.
I actually have no eyes. I'm blindfolded. I code. I just bang the keyboard until the compiler says okay.
Pretty much. That's how it kind of is anyway, right?
That's how gameplay programming works, Tim.
Okay.
But yes, thank you, Kirk. We do try to illuminate. I don't know how well we do because, of course, I'm blindfolded. But we're and veteran. Good choice instead of old. Thank you.
Yeah, that's always the diplomatic
way to say
old. Yeah.
Old guys with gray hair, or no hair.
And we have bigger and badder prizes coming up, right? Are we still gonna give away something? Someday?
I'm gonna give some more stuff away. When we get to
I have some stuff too. Yeah,
150 reviews. We're in the 80s now. I have still not heard. I need to look back a ways, but I haven't heard from the San Francisco Kid and Mr. Eric Anderson. I think was the other one. You know what? I'm going to say right now, if I haven't heard from you by next week, your shot is gone. You're gone. You're eliminated. And I will do a new drawing from all the reviews, including the new ones we've gotten since. And in the offing is a trilogy of Starfighter comics, which are quite good, written by Hayden Blackman, who was our Starfighter and Jedi Starfighter writer, and also did the Force Unleashed, and recently Mafia 3. Great guy, Hayden.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a Fallout 3 Collector's Edition. It's been opened, but everything is in it. I just kind of opened it because I didn't know what was in it. And that is yours to have. So if you have not heard from those two folks...
Pretty rare these days, that Collector's Edition.
Yeah. I could go and sell the stuff on eBay, but honestly, I can't be bothered, and I'd rather give it to somebody
for sure.
who's enjoying what we're doing. I did hear from one person, and that name is lost to history now, but I'm still going to email it. But yeah, I still have those two things to send out. So, now I feel bad. Like, who was that?
No, we got it on a previous episode.
We did get it. I'm sorry. Not to distract us. Anyway, that's the stuff for tonight. We'd love to have more reviews on iTunes. Like I said, we're going to try to push through to I guess this would be 10%. Basically 10% of what I think of as our baseline audience, although we are actually climbing up. We're going to aim for 150 reviews. And at 150, we'll give away more stuff. I don't know what it'll be, but it'll be more stuff.
I have some ideas.
Oh, I have some ideas too, my friend. I have a much bigger collector's edition box sitting in my basement. That is.
Oh, well, I have statue type thing.
Mm.
And I also have some signed team posters.
Oh, I have some of those too, yeah.
That only team members got.
Only team members and select friends like Steven Spielberg. So, Steven Spielberg, please do not rate us. We'd love to have it, but we don't want to give you a second poster that you already have. Anyway. I think that's about all we have this week.
Sounds good.
You can find us on Twitter at DevGameClub. I personally am at Brett_Duville, and he is...
At Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
Not JRX, even though contractually it should be.
X was taken. Couldn't get it, so I'm just the JR.
Just the JR at the end. And you can shoot us an email at devgameclub@gmail.com. And, of course, shoot us those reviews on iTunes. You can find the podcast at devgameclub.com. But it's in all of your podcatchers. We're on Switcher, we're on the Google Play, we're on the Amazon thing, whatever that is. So you can find us pretty much everywhere. Thanks so much for listening, and good night.
Good night.
Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot this, but I wanted to mention our outro music this week is from a fan. It's from
nice.
It is from Ficus.
Yeah.
And I wanted to mention this to you so that you would remind me, but I remember just in time. It is from Ficus / let's see if I can find his. Yes, at giant_rat, which is an awesome RPG Twitter handle. But yeah, Ficus / at giant_rat contributed our outgoing music this week. It is a fan interpretation of my auto-generated jukebox music that we've been using for months and that Tim hates. But anyway, is what you're...
I like his more. It's awesome.
Well, yeah, he actually went and actually is a human being actually doing a thing, but that's what I asked from you. But no, you're like, I don't like it, boo-hoo, well, whatever. Anyway, thank you, Ficus.
Yeah, amazing.
And you're about to hear his music now. Good night.
Good night.